So it is my deep pleasure. It is a pleasure. It's my deep pleasure, like a pizza, to welcome to episode 69, Jay Christopher King. Now, Jay, this is your fourth. I think this is your fourth, you know, meeting up like this. Your fourth.
Yeah,
What's the
I
word?
think.
Gestation.
Well,
Gestation.
sure. I'll take it. I
Yeah,
appreciate you asking me back to the show. It's been a few minutes.
I know it's been a
I
long
appreciate it.
time.
It's nice for it to be the fourth time that I've appeared on your show. That's wonderful. I always love the conversations with you, and it's great to know that it's lucky number 69.
Yeah,
That holds a lot of significance to a lot of people for various reasons. And I appreciate being back. It's good.
very good. Well, you're our most repeat guest. Does that make sense? Most repeat guest? I think you know what I mean.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. So Jay, and also, by the way, just a quick word, Jay, and I've spoken to you about this, but I need to apologize and explain myself to the audience, my loyal audience, who have been intermittently getting in contact with me, saying, "What's the deal? What's happened to Paranormal Blip?" Well, basically, there's no secret. I'm an open book. The thing is, that was a bit like Hugh Grant that for a few beats of that was. Do you get that? Get a bit of Hugh.
I yeah, yeah, I found it.
Exactly, yeah.
I heard it.
I'm
Yeah.
an open book. And essentially I've been just too busy. I mean, there's no mystery around it. I've been so unbelievably busy. But given the opportunity to speak to Jay, I grabbed it with both hands. So I'm back for 69, and hopefully, how it works in my life. I'm constantly talking to people about, their own extraordinary experiences. And I'm hoping to set up a couple of interviews with people in the not too distant future. Let's put it like that. So, Jay, lots to talk about. Let's start, if it's okay, with the Soul Foundation.
Sure.
So you were one of was it about 300? I read about 300 people that
Something like
were,
that. Yeah.
yeah, these kind of invited guys that turned up there.
Hmm.
So how was it? Tell us all about it.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, one thing that I want to mention at the outset, yes, I was invited, though, I think it's important to remind people, or for folks that don't know, well, for context, for those that haven't been paying attention to Twitter or X or whatever those ways these days, or been listening to other YouTube shows or whatnot, that the Soul Foundation, it's an initiative started by Gary Nolan and a man named Peter Skafish, who's actually an anthropologist. Um, and also, there are a couple other people that have been involved and are also still involved. A guy named Jonathan Berta, who is a really pleasant guy, who works in kind of robotics and AI a bit, and also Chris Mellon has been involved a little bit in the kind of formation of the Soul Foundation on a more informal level, and Dave Grusch himself has been involved a little bit in kind of the formation of what happened with the Soul Foundation, and so it's based around UAP research and policy initiatives, and it was hosted the first proposed annual symposium was hosted out at Stanford University, which of course is one of the most well-respected institutions and regularly is in kind of like the top five and usually in one of the first few slots in the United States anyway, in terms of academic institutions for a number of different reasons: engineering, medicine, a range of fields, computing being a huge one. And so that's out in Palo Alto, which is kind of like the center Silicon Valley. And so contextually, it's an interesting place to be. You know,
Yeah.
it's been a while since I've been out to Stanford, and it's been a while since I've been out to Silicon Valley. Um, and so it was interesting to go out there. But I do want to mention at the outset that people had to apply to be invited. And so there was a portal on the Soul Foundation site that was open for a while. And for those that kind of followed the issue very closely, you had to, no matter who you were, you had to kind of enter in some of these fields and just say who you were and why you're interested in the field and what you do that might be relevant to why you would be invited. You had to apply. And then people were invited from that. Everybody had to apply. And so I think that I've seen a little bit of kind of, derision or animosity from like, why were these people invited? And well, we applied. If you didn't apply, you weren't invited. And I think that that's an important distinction. I don't think that everybody that applied got in, but 100% of the people that did not apply, did not get invited to the Soul Foundation Symposium. So I think that's important to remember, you know.
Yeah,
Um, so along those lines, so I applied months ago, and I was concerned. I knew that it was going to be a tight event, and jumping ahead a bit, and jumping back, we're having another Inquiry Anomalous conference, co-hosted by me, James Iandoli, and Leslie Kane, later this week. And we had already talked to Peter Skafish, again, one of the Soul Foundation founders, and had booked him as a speaker as kind of one of the first times that he'd be kind of talking to the community about his thought and like his background and his interests within the field, which seemed like an important thing to do. But even having gone back and forth with Peter for months about him coming out to do the conference and where we were going to get him a hotel and his flights coming in for Berlin and all this stuff, I still wasn't sure whether I was going to get into the Soul Foundation conference or not, because it was a pretty hot ticket, even if you applied, right? But I was pretty, I was very happy to see that I got invited, and that I heard from some of my friends and colleagues in the space that they got invited as well, and so even though I've kind of spent a inordinate amount of money, more money than I could necessarily afford, this year already, in like getting myself out to conferences and kind of doing my own work in the field, I couldn't resist. I had to go out there, and I'm glad that I did. Yeah, I'm glad that I did. And so I went out there, and there's so many wonderful people. The speaker list was incredible, and just looking around the audience in terms of people that I know in the space, like Kelly Chase, who I'm working with on a new docuseries, and Jordan Flowers, who's also working on that docuseries. But then, other folks like Dave Foley, who's very interested in UAP issues and is a comedian that I love and that I've loved for a long time. And he's become a bit of a friend. He lives out here, and it was great to see him there, and his podcast partner Tom, and like Micah Hanks and Chrissy Newton from the Debrief were kind of around the audience, and a bunch of other folks in the space that, when you just kind of looked around, it wasn't just the people who were on stage, but we were surrounded by folks that have been making an impact in the community recently and for a while, and that was, so it felt great that way. It also felt historic because it was a symposium that was presented by the Stanford School of Medicine. So that felt like another kind of level here, right? Where we've had like the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University, another elite institution here. And so having, things like Project Galileo at Harvard, having the Archives of the Impossible at Rice, and now the Soul Foundation initiative kind of being presented through Stanford University, it feels like we're really in kind of a new era in terms of the cultural conversation regarding anomalous experiences and UAP issues from an academic framework. I'll pause there and let you kind of reframe where you want to talk about the conference.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that opportunity for me. Well, I mean, one thing is that it's interesting you talk about how everybody had to apply, because that directly contradicts this sense that some people have of, it being a clique, and very interesting and informative that you were actually in contact with to Scapefish, but even though those negotiations and the conversations are ongoing in relation to your event on Saturday, which we will obviously talk about, um, that he didn't like give you a nudge and a wink and say, "Oh yeah, see you down at Seoul." So there's that, and there is a kind of that also adds to the sense of it being a kind of academic proposition. They are interested in what people can bring to the conversation in any kind of academic conference. You're interested in inviting people that can kind of extend the conversation. It's not just open to anyone. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And good to kind of burst the bubble of kind of gossip mongers as well. So how long were you there for? Were you there for the
Uh,
duration?
well, well, yes, I was. I got in. Okay, so the conference started on Friday.
Yeah.
The main conference was only 2 days. It was Friday and Saturday,
Mm.
and it was completely blocked out. The first day started at 8:15 a.m. and went until about 8 p.m. So it was about 12 hours, including like an hour long reception at the end of the night. And then the next day it was similar. It was a pretty relentless and heavy
Yeah,
pace.
absolutely.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah.
more so than our casual UFO conferences where we have a few talks and then people have coffee for an hour or
Yeah,
whatever and
yeah,
then they go
yeah,
back eventually.
yeah,
This was a pretty intense situation, and it was dealing with intense topics with deep thought that
yeah,
really um, it felt good to see these issues being dealt with in such a serious way. I mean,
yeah,
I'm used to
absolutely.
that myself in general, but
Yeah,
contextually within an academic institution like that, and then seeing people that have been so involved in the military and government initiatives,
yeah,
sure, but then
yeah,
also people that have been working in academic and independent and kind of startup initiatives as well.
yeah.
And then other folks, I know a couple people that are writers, just fiction and nonfiction writers that were
Uh-huh.
invited to be kind of representative of the kind of more of literature and the humanities. And
Uh-huh.
there are
Yeah,
other
yeah,
folks involved in religious study and philosophy and anthropology and things like that
yeah,
that were represented as well. And so it was a curious mix in a way because you don't normally have an academic, even within an academic institution, you don't often have a symposium that has people from so many fields descending in one place,
yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah,
right? And so there are a lot of kind of different sensibilities
yeah,
represented among the group, and that felt good. It felt good to have that many folks around.
yeah.
When I
Fantastic.
go down to the Rice University conferences, there's a certain kind of sensibility that pervades. It's
Mm-hmm.
still very wide, and you have people from very different backgrounds, different cosmologies, different ethnic backgrounds, different academic backgrounds descending on Rice for those situations, but you're still mainly dealing with people that deal with humanities and social sciences.
Mm-hmm.
Though there are some remote viewers and folks like that do have, of course, that are military vets and things like this. This was a different situation, and that you had, say, like philosophers and writers that might not be too psyched about artificial intelligence sitting right next to somebody that runs an AI firm or something like that,
Mm.
right? And so there are a lot of interesting bedfellows and kind of folks being rubbing elbows together that wouldn't normally, which caused it was a really interesting social environment for that reason, I'd say. Yeah.
And if you look at, with the what couple of weeks removed, if you look back at the events that you attended, the talks that you attended, are there a couple of highlights that you can mention? Not to put you on the spot or anything, Jay, but anything
Sure.
kind of
Yeah.
jumps out from that
Sure.
those 2 days?
I yeah. I mean, one thing to reference is another kind of a point for some is that Gary and Peter ask people to observe what are called Chatham House rules. And so until the talks are published online, we have to people that participated, people that were invited, agreed to be more oblique about how they refer to specific talks. And so I can speak about the topics that were addressed with great
Yes.
detail, but sometimes I might not be able to say who exactly said what until those videos are published, because people that presented were sometimes talking about sensitive information or things that were, very conditional in some ways.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Totally.
and so Gary and Peter were able to get some people to speak that might not otherwise want to speak, even
Yeah.
possibly, because they got to have final approval about what would be published to the general public. Because some of those conversations, it's easy to get them misinterpreted, which
Sure.
I totally understand. And so
Yeah. Of
I'll
course.
observe those. I'll observe that rule because I respect what Gary and Peter and others put together, and um, I want to stand by my word. If I
Yeah. Of
agreed to
course.
do
Yeah.
that, then I should do that.
Totally.
So along those lines, though, the first day, I can say that in general, from the first day before lunch, you know, uh, we were it's public knowledge that Avi Loeb and Beatrice Villarreal and Kevin Knuth made presentations, and in general, I appreciate all their work. I think Beatrice is doing great things. I think it's amazing that she has figured out a way to look at the older data in terms of photographic plates from the realm of astronomy to find, using new techniques, looking at older records and finding anomalies in the research. She's hit some extraordinary evidence in that regard in general, and I think that she does fantastic work that way. And I look forward to hearing more from her, and I hope that her initiatives receive a lot of funding because they have a lot of potential and a lot of weight there. That said, I also really appreciate Kevin Knuth's work. I think he's doing wonderful work. I enjoy him as a human being. Like I've hung out with him a few times. He's fun to hang out with. He's an entertaining person. He's really thoughtful and funny and insightful. And he generally speaking, like brings an extraordinary amount of reasonable, kind of rational expertise to the situation. Where in general, not speaking specifically about his talk that day, but in general, he does a great job of saying, like, these are the scientific rules, like these are the scientific laws that even if you have a bachelor of science, if you have a bachelor of engineering in our system, you would know that X, Y, and Z are typically the case.
Mm.
And then you can use these common laws, these common rules, to understand how this something that is observed here is something extraordinary, right? And so in general, he's looked at some of the older data as well and come up with some interesting situations. For example, he really enjoys talking about field effects, right? The field effects of UAP. And there's been this long-standing observation among people that experiencers, people that have seen close up UAP, UFOs, etc., that often when they've been in their vehicles, that they've stopped, that their cars have stopped, the electricity goes off. This is a very common report, especially when a UAP is kind of low over a car, right? And Kevin was pointing out that the before Kevin has pointed out before in the past, not necessarily at this presentation, but he's pointed out that there, before cars were computerized, that there were common systems among almost all vehicles,
Yeah.
and they used common voltages, they had common circuitry. And so knowing what that circuitry was, and knowing that there's like and supposing that there's an electromagnetic impact
Uh-huh.
of the field effects, that you could actually know, using already known laws, already known engineering principles, like what kind of electromagnetic field effect it would take,
Yes.
like how much energy it would take for something to automatically stop in a situation like that if it was purely because of a field effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a relatively simple process. And he's like, look, if you've taken 4 years of science in college, you could know, you could work this out. He's said things like that before. And so, one could suppose, for example, that he may have made similar assertions in this presentation. And as he has in the past, it would be out of character for him not to. And I just really appreciate that kind of work. I think he does fabulous work for the field, and and using common sense and common rules in general to be able to look at and be able to say, like, well, it has to be above X, and
Yeah.
things like that
Yeah. Yeah.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So, I would say from the first day that Kevin Knuth's presentation was great. Gary also did a great presentation that day. Diana Walsh Pasolka was towards the end of the day, did a fantastic job. And of course, it's always amazing. It's incredible. It's getting increasingly rare, but it's always a pleasure and an honor to hear from Jacques Vallée. It's always just
Yeah.
seeing the man still walking among us on Earth is kind of incredible, and that he still can put together such a thoughtful, bright, lucid, illuminating presentation at his advanced age
Mm.
is not just impressive, it's astonishing. He's an intellectual heavyweight. He'll always be remembered as such. And it was great to hear from him that day.
Wow, that's beautiful tribute there to Jacques Vallée. How old is he? Roughly.
I believe he's 82 or 83.
Wow,
Um,
that's old.
yeah, don't quote me on that, but I think
Is he
that's what
going
he
to go
is. Yeah.
for the presidency next year?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, he would qualify by that role, right?
Absolutely. Although, unfortunately, he's
oh yeah,
French.
he's 80. I just looked him up. Yeah, unfortunately, he's French. I just looked him up. He's 84 years old.
84. Oh, then he'll get in.
Yeah.
Okay,
You think,
so
right?
well, that sounds amazing, and it's really interesting. I think I heard about the Chatham House rules in relation to the Self Foundation. So, yeah, but thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we start recording here, you just then mentioned Kelly. So you were
Mhm.
working with Kelly, and you met up with her. So this is Kelly Chase, UFO Rabbit Hole, who I
Mhm.
had the. I mean, think she's a genius, and it was absolutely brilliant to speak to her earlier this year. I absolutely loved it, and I was so um what's the word, like I really felt like I needed to prepare, when you speak to somebody. I mean, when you speak to someone of that, I mean, I think you're friends with her, so it might be a bit different, but certainly I was slightly kind of intimidated by her genius, kind of leading up to that interview. um Having said that, uh you know she was brilliant in the interview, and check it out if you haven't seen it, although I don't know the episode number, but just look it up. So yeah, you're working with her on some kind of docu-series, is that right?
That's right. That's absolutely right. And yeah, I agree with you. Kelly is absolutely brilliant. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be working with her now. Um,
Mm.
yeah, earlier this summer, near the beginning of the summer, gosh, I guess it was around somewhere between the time of archives and Contact in the Desert, I guess it was. Um, our mutual friend Jordan, who I've known for a while, he lives up in Connecticut. He often comes down to New York City for work. He's been a buddy for a while, and he invited Kelly and I and a few other people up to his place up in Connecticut for a long weekend, just to basically like talk about what kind of like looking forward, like what we thought would be helpful within ufology and within anomalous studies in general, and like looking at like what's not out there already and what would be helpful initiatives. And so he brought in people from different fields that he just knew, and it was such a bright idea. It was such a bright idea. And And I feel like things like that should happen more often in the field, if possible.
Absolutely.
People have so little time sometimes and so little money, and people have kids like yourself and, things like
Mm.
that. And so it can be hard to get away, and that's totally understandable. But we need to take common sense approaches sometimes to these issues. And often that involves logging out of social media and resisting the urge to fight with each other and try to be productive in a way. And sometimes often that involves getting together and actually, breaking bread with people and meeting up. And so I'm really glad that he did that. And coming out of that conversation, coming out of that weekend, a few different people that were involved in that weekend kind of went away thinking like, oh, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that. It was very inspiring. It was wonderful and inspiring in a grassroots way. And Kelly and I came away with that came away from that weekend recognizing that there are a lot of opportunities within media that could be helpful in terms of doing something responsible. She does that with UFO Rabbit Hole for sure, and you do it with your show as well. It's important to have people representing a kind of more elevated tone in this space, and and that people really look at these topics from different frameworks and from different sensibilities, and that takes a range of approaches. Um, we don't have to just settle for 3 or 4 different sources of media, even popular media within the space. And it's important to have more. And so Kelly and I were recognizing that within within media that covers UFO topics on TV, you generally have two poles. You generally have two poles. One, which is fantastic, and I watch all of them, are very grounded programs like Leslie Kane's UFOs Investigating the Unknown, for example, or Encounters, which Amblin and Steven Spielberg put out, recently. Other shows along those lines, and even projects like Moment of Contact, James Fox's work in general, things along those lines, projects along those lines, or Randy Nickerson's fantastic aerial phenomenon. Those projects are fantastic, and they're largely speaking working under the central idea that they're supposed to prove the case, that they're supposed to prove that this actually happened, that they're supposed to show evidence and kind of follow it as if it's a crime scene and an investigation, which I think is why so many people that follow crime podcasts have been recently kind of shifting over to ufology, which is a really interesting situation that we've been seeing in podcasting recently. But anyway, so like there's this one poll where a bunch of great grounded programs try to prove the case. And then on the other hand, we have certain shows that I don't necessarily have to name that are ungrounded, that kind of that come from the central position that there's like a central reality to this subject, but they come from an ungrounded place, and so they'll just go around and say, well, that was probably aliens, was that aliens, that might have been aliens over there, that could have been, historically, like let's look at every monument that was ever created that
Sure. Yeah.
seems challenging now and assume that it was aliens, right?
Yeah.
And like without really having the receipts or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's its own form of entertainment, and those shows are really popular. And they're and in many ways they are working with less challenges because, and maybe they're slightly more popular in general because, how many people, Kelly and I were thinking about this, like how many people hate watch UFO programs?
Mm.
How many people watch a UFO program and say, well, this is all bull, let's see if I can be convinced? Probably not so many. Probably not so many people do that. And so we decided that it would be a great idea to make a show with grounded experts, that, and starting from where a lot of shows end, which is that there's a fundamental reality to this, so that we could kind of unshackle experts in the field to get to really like the deeper issues and really be able to elaborate on their points and get to kind of a more realistic and perspective that has depth and nuance with regard to where we are now, like how did we get here, like how is this hidden for so long, how did we miss this, Were there other cultures that had this the whole time? Situations like that, and kind of looking ahead too. So yeah, and so since then we were incredibly excited, and we've gone kind of full bore into it, and now we actually already started shooting for it. So when we were out in Palo Alto for the Soul conference, we actually shot out there with Whitley Strieber and with Jeff Kripal, who was one of the featured speakers at Soul, and Ea Whiteley, the space psychologist who Diana Pasulka wrote about recently in Encounters. We spoke with her, and we sat down with Greg Bishop, who wrote the great kind of disinformation classic, a classic on disinformation called Project Beta back in the day. And we're going to continue to speak to other people at the Inquiry Anomalous conference, and into next year we're going to be speaking with folks. So we have an array. Just the other day, a few days ago, I went over to Leslie Kane's place and recorded with her for the show. So we're really excited about where it's headed, and we've been moving quickly. We've been moving very quickly, and we anticipate having the first series of it out, the first season of it out, late spring, early summer next year. So it's a pretty quick turnaround time. Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Well, I mean, obviously, keep us posted on that. That sounds very exciting.
Sure will.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. And I love the thinking, the idea of people coming to a kind of house and discussing ways, like how you want the future to look and ways to make that happen. Yeah, I think that's like fundamentally important. And I mean, you're doing it in a way with Inquiry Anomalous. He said, that's a beautiful, I should become a DJ with those kind of links. Amazing.
That was a really good transition. That was fantastic transition. Yeah, very good transition. No, no one noticed, especially now, especially addressing it for about 55 seconds. No, I think
exactly.
Why don't we take a victory lap on that transition?
Let's I know.
We'll take.
I think I'm gonna put more lights off in my house.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. Did you notice that?
Oh yeah. Depending on how long we talk, you'll see it happen over here too. Eventually we'll just have to devolve into ghost stories and whatnot.
You know what? It's getting dark at 4:30 at night. Oh god, it's so depressing. I can't wait for the spring. I'm not a winter person. Too. I love Christmas, but I'm not a winter person.
Yeah. So, me too.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Yeah, Christmas in New York.
I was.
Is it as good?
I love Christmas, and like, it's better than Home Alone 2. It's better than Home Alone 2. I don't have any problems with Home Alone 2, but it is pretty magical being in New York this time of year. With the lights and the trees and the architecture, it gets oversold a little bit probably in popular culture, but it does feel pretty special. Great, it feels, But anyways, speaking along those lines of Inquiry Anomalous, right?
Yes.
We've got a new conference coming up. It'll be our fourth. We had the first one back in October of last year. That was the very first one, and Gary Nolan was the headlining speaker at that event. We had other people like Mitch Horowitz there, and that was really fun. And Darren King, others. He hadn't even revealed his full name at that point. So that was tricky for the bill. Kind of made it look like we had a transformer on stage. But it was good. And then the second conference we had was that star-studded. We had Chris Mellon and Leslie. That was the first time Leslie was really involved with this conference series, and of course she's become more and more involved. And Ralph Blumenthal, etc. Jeff Kripal was there. And then at the third one in April of this year, we had Brandon Fugel, and gosh, who else did? Ryan Graves was there before the House UAP hearing. That wasn't even happening yet, but there's a lot of energy happening around that in April. Leslie was already working on the article with Dave Grusch. Nobody knew that that was, I mean, most people didn't know. Almost everyone didn't know that that was happening at that point. It was a really exciting time to be doing something then. And now here we are in December, and we're going to be doing our fourth in 14 months, which is a pretty relentless pace, but
Absolutely.
it, in some ways it matches the pace of these discoveries and the cultural conversation around these issues. I think we've kind of it's I think part of it is just recognizing that there needs to be more conversation like this on a regular basis, and that if
Yeah.
somebody else isn't doing it, well, then by gosh, we have to do it. And I wish that more people would kind of come to it with that mindset. I think a lot of people, they get frustrated about wanting somebody to do something
Mm.
within this field,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
then they don't necessarily look at what their own skill set is and what they can bring to the field. Sometimes,
Yeah,
that's an
definitely.
important part of
Yeah.
development. So I think so anyway, along those lines, we're gonna have a great lineup. We've got Diana Walsh Pasolka, we've got Tim Gallaudet, um,
Yeah.
Paul H. Smith, Peter Scafish, Joshua Cutchin, Mike Masters, and we have a special guest. We have a surprise guest that
Oh,
I
good.
just announced this last weekend. Alex Dietrich is going to be there as
Oh my
well.
God. I
So
didn't
it's
know
it's a
that.
pretty
This
yeah.
is
So it's a
news
pretty
to me.
stellar. Yeah. So it's a pretty stellar lineup. I'm really
That's
looking forward
fantastic.
to it. Right? Yeah. And
That's
then
amazing.
Leslie, James, and I are going to co-host, and that'll be fun. And Leslie's going to do kind of, and it's now a tradition in a way for her to do a conversation with one of the speakers. She did it with Chris Mellon, and then
Yeah.
last time around she did it with Brandon Fugel and Kurt Mungle both.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah,
this
yeah.
time she's going to do a conversation on stage with Alex Dietrich, and that'll be great.
That's
So
fantastic. Wow.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Um, I only met Alex at Seoul just a few weeks ago, and
Okay.
she was so excited to hear about the conference in New York that she just jumped on the bill almost immediately.
Really?
Um, yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
mean, it took.
brilliant, man.
She thought about it for about. I think she thought about it for about 22 hours, and then she was all in.
Right.
Um, and she just wanted to come, and
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
Leslie said, "Well, why don't you ask her if she wants to do something?" And so I got up the courage and approached her again, and she was very, I don't want to over characterize her or mischaracterize her, but she was very interested. So that's going to be really fun. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, that's amazing. I mean, again, it's a fantastic lineup. And ever since the first time we met was when you
Mm.
were talking about the first one last October 22. And I think I said then, every time you've come on to Paranormal Blip, I said the same thing, but you just mentioned it. So of course you're setting up for me to say, the thing that I love about you in this regard, and James, is that and also the other folks that were kind of, there at the beginning, is your get up and go. And actually, Kelly, who's there at the beginning, is you're working with
Mhm.
her again. This idea of, you don't wait for other people, you do it yourself. That is so important and it's so inspiring, like generally speaking, but also in this field, you know, so I absolutely love that. And I know that we've spoken in the past about the ridiculousness of having to stage this in New York with all of the competing tensions and, difficulties and, um, just the stress of it, in some ways, in terms of actually being the people responsible for staging something like that. And then, of
Mhm.
course, at the other side of that, and it must be lovely for you to experience these moments, is that when someone like Alex Dietrich hears about it, hears it's happening, and can't wait to get involved. So that's it's testament to you and the work that you've put in these last 14 months, that you're at that stage now where those kind of things can happen. So that's wonderful to hear, Jay. Now I've got my ticket and I've been kind of a live stream participant of all of
Mhm.
these, and I've got my ticket for Saturday the 9th. And are there
That's
still
right.
live stream kind of slots, as it were?
There are,
available?
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I I hope that we can put a link
of course. Yeah,
in your notes and things like that for it. Yeah, it's
absolutely.
we have more. We, as is our tradition at this point, so far for each conference, we've limited the live stream to 500 participants,
Yeah,
to help ensure kind of a more quality, intimate experience that kind of more accurately reflects what's actually happening in the room. I think many of us that are used to doing live streams have been in situations where thousands of people have been there and involved, and it's really hard to be heard. It's really hard to ask questions and things
yeah,
like that,
yeah,
or have conversations when it's just kind of a blur of text in the chat.
yeah,
And so with these conferences, I mean, one important aspect that is that people in person and online, we build in a lot of time, and we've built in more and more with each conference. We've built in more time for questions and answers,
mm,
because we recognize that we have an incredibly high level of participants. But I mean, it's a very thoughtful, bright group of people that attend these events.
mm,
And that's partially by design, right? We tried to make like this kind of beautiful situation just for the most cerebral eggheads in the field, and field of dreams style. Like if you build it, they come, and magically it's been working out relatively well that way. And so we have this situation where we have these bright minds attending, and so we like having that conversation. We like provoking that kind of conversation. And so in general, the format is people are going to be doing about a half hour for a talk or
uh-huh.
presentation, and about a half hour of Q&A.
Okay,
And
fantastic.
and that can't happen every single time, because sometimes we have to, somebody runs long and we have to adjust the
Of
schedule
course,
here or there or
of
something
course.
like that. But generally speaking, the kind of rule of thumb is about half the time on stage is a talk, and about half the time is a Q&A. And then I and James try to bounce equally between people asking questions in person and people in the live stream, so that folks in the live stream can feel like active participants in the situation and be heard within the room itself. And I think that that's really important, so that we can kind of broaden the community and hear from people outside the country and from different backgrounds, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And the highlight of my life, sorry, the second best moment of my life so far, after the birth of my son, was when when on you read out my question to Brandon's Bugle, which is about how his kind of business relationships, his business partners, and people that he meets in these kind of real estate deals, what they think of his the kind of work he's doing in this space. And his
Mhm.
answer was absolutely brilliant. The whole thing was like it's just under the birth of my son in terms of a kind of moment of my life. It was absolutely extraordinary answer. It
Well,
was a
I'm
good
glad you
answer, by
liked
the way.
it. It
I
was
mean, I really
Well, it was
remember
a
that
great
answer.
question, and
It's
it
a good
provoked a
question.
great response
So
too.
you
Yeah,
got to, so
you
that
really got him going.
I know
You
he
got a lot of
really.
energy out of him with that. It was
That's it.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
really fired him up. But
Yeah.
the thing to do though, audience, is that like I'm kind of doing this leading up to it's only the 9th, it's Saturday night, so you can't sit on your bum like not doing anything. You got to get online. I'll put the link in, obviously I'll put the link in, and you got to get your live stream, and then when you're watching you're thinking, okay, what's the blockbuster question that I want to ask? So, and it will be
That's right.
just slightly down from the birth of your children. I can guarantee that. I can promise that. If you've got any problem with that, just CJ. Right. So no, but
Thanks.
I
Thanks,
love
Pete.
that
Thanks
component.
so
Like
much.
just seriously though, there is that sense of, it isn't, oh, this is going on here, and I'm like, it really is that you really feel a part of it, and you feel a part of the conversation that's happening in the kind of in the the chat as they call it, with
Hmm.
all of the kind of online community, and you also feel very very connected to what's happening in New York. So, and that's an unbelievable lineup. And again, you're doing this thing that you've always done, which is so important, where you're bringing people together from different fields, and making those connections from different fields, So you've got
That's
people
right.
like, Michael P. Masters, who I know that, our audience know who these guys are. you know.
Mm.
But for
Hmm.
instance, Paul H. Smith, he brings something to it, which
He
is,
does.
I mean, the guy's there's so many legends here, man. Like he's a legend, and
Yeah, yeah, involved in the remote viewing, and part of
yeah,
the reason, I mean, I've enjoyed. I hung out with Paul at the first Archives of the Impossible conference, and
uh-huh.
we had a good time there. And then I saw him earlier this year at Contact in the Desert, and we were both speaking there, and we both enjoyed doing that. It's wonderful to see him out in Palm Springs. And then Leslie and I were talking, and I mean, first of all, it's one of the great pleasures of my life and a huge honor that I've gotten myself into a situation where I'm very friendly with Leslie. I mean, she's a living legend, and she's arguably done as much or more, as much or the most for the field in terms of like pushing the ball forward than
Mm.
almost anyone
Yeah,
living
absolutely.
anyway. I mean,
Yeah,
between
yeah,
uh, exposing ATIP and the cockpit videos, David
yeah,
Grusch,
yeah,
bringing out Ryan Graves, introducing many people to Lou Elizondo and Chris
yeah,
Mellon and all these figures, all the way back to the Cometa report, and really looking into like the Kecksburg crash retrieval case back in the late night, like looking at that case in the late 90s. She's been at this for quite a while,
yeah.
and she's been doing amazing, consistent work for such a long time. And just knowing her, and I see that, like, I've gotten I've gotten a text from her just since we started recording. Like, we talk almost every day, and like
Uh-huh.
when we're working on these events, and it's incredible. So anyway, I love Leslie. I think she's amazing.
Yeah.
She's so brilliant. And we were talking on the phone a while back, and we were talking about, like, she mentioned it was something along the lines, I don't want to mischaracterize her, but it was along the lines of like, should we have somebody at the event that like might have muddy boots in their closet? Somebody that's done really groundwork, somebody that's been out in the field, somebody that's kind of gotten, you know, that has, dirt under their fingernails. And we looked at a few names, and one of the names that we came up with was Paul H. Smith. And I'm really glad that he was able to do it this time. Because like you said, yeah, he's done significant work in the field. It's really important, I think, for people to remember that we're not just talking about ships that fly around in the sky, that there is a large range of issues
Mm.
related to anomalous phenomena, and that touches on so much. And remote viewing is one of these tethers
Mm.
between ufology and the wider range of kind of ESP consciousness psi issues that are incredibly relevant, because as many people that have looked into the documentation of like the Stargate program, the programs at Stanford Research Institute, et cetera. There is a jaw dropping amount of substance to the remote viewing topic
Oh,
and the pursuit of that.
absolutely. Yeah,
There is, there
absolutely.
absolutely is, and so being able to have somebody that has so much direct experience with that
Mm.
and being able to speak on it from their experience, I think is really important to have involved in the conversation that day.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of Dad Smith, and I interviewed him last year.
Oh, sure.
And
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. I get along well with Des too.
yeah,
Yeah.
Daz is amazing, and I kind of follow his work with the crypto viewing group, which
Mm-hmm.
is like
Mm-hmm.
absolutely extraordinary stuff. Um, and also though, with going back to Leslie Kane, um, I when I have conversations, I'm kind of talking to people all the time about this, and the number of people that reference Surviving Death, which is on
Mm-hmm.
Netflix, and it's been like, it's this kind of foundation stone for quite a lot of people in terms of um, verifying, if you like, or kind of giving them confidence to talk about their own experiences, kind of through
Mm-hmm.
the something that they know that I would have seen, and something that, it's a wonderful program, that, and I think it's kind of, people kind of use successful, brilliant programs that does in a kind of different format what you're doing, one is on kind of physical mediumship, and kind of
Hmm.
there's a whole kind of panoply of different areas that she investigates in that. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's really, you're absolutely right. She's done an enormous amount in this field, going back years and years and years. And it's really
Absolutely.
nice to know that there's something out there that's on Netflix, that people
That's right.
refer to in conversation with people that are interested in, kind of hearing about their own experiences.
I
So,
completely agree.
the main thing to come out of this podcast, loyal listener, is to get on the internet and to go to the link and join us on the ninth. I was going to say the 19th,
Saturday the
but it
ninth. That's
depends
right.
where you are in the
Uh-huh.
world, of course. So for us people in
That's
Britain,
true.
it is the evening, but for folks
Yeah.
in what time does it kick off in New York?
In New York, it'll kick off at about 10:30 a.m. And so I
Yeah.
think that is 3:30 for you
Okay, so
guys.
that's, yeah,
Is
it's
that
not
right?
quite the
Yeah.
evening. Well, it's starting to get dark,
Yeah.
more or less, but yeah, so
Yeah, it's
3:30,
almost
yeah.
gonna, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
you'll
yeah,
pop your popcorn and make sure you have some tea on the kettle, right? And tea water on the kettle.
So
I don't
English.
know what you say. I don't know what you guys say over there. But
Yeah,
like
have some tea on the kettle.
I
That's exactly what we say.
okay.
Yeah,
I
that's
feel
what
like
we
you're
say.
mocking me, but that's all right.
No,
That's all
no,
right.
I do it.
So but it's also important to remember, people are going to be tuning in from places like Australia, East Asia, and things like that.
Yeah,
And sometimes the time doesn't work, but we do send out a link
yeah,
that's a live stream link afterwards so that people can check out what happened, and so people have a
yeah,
record
yeah,
of the events
yeah,
afterwards.
yeah.
Um, and um, and we will continue that. And in fact, I was just talking to the AV team earlier this afternoon to ensure that we have the best live stream tech that we've ever had at one of these events, and to ensure the very best experience that we can possibly do. Um,
Okay,
we want to continue to
sounds
kind of
amazing.
to top ourselves, and sometimes it's easier to top yourselves than other times. And so we're looking forward to making a quality experience for those joining us online for sure.
Okay. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. And also, it's my dad's birthday as well on the ninth as well. So
Oh
I'll
my
be
gosh! Well,
thinking
happy
of you.
birthday to him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. So, now, one thing that we spoke about this before we recorded, I want to um, hear what you think about essentially breaking news, breaking all around
Hmm.
us. The UAP Disclosure Act. So this is the Schumer bill, and it's kind of transferring into, how much of it is going to get, how much of his amendment is going to get into law. And there's been a whole, I'm sure my audience know all about it, but essentially there's been this kind of massive pushback by a couple of Republican, um, lawmakers, and the Defense Department. Generally speaking,
Hmm.
I think it's kind of fair to say. Um, and then uh, I wrote it down. This tweet, yeah. So this is a tweet
Hmm.
from Ross Coulthard. So he sent it at around about maybe just over an hour and a half ago, an hour and 40 minutes ago, and this is replying to Christopher Sharp, Britain's own Christopher
Hmm.
Sharp. And Ross says, "I'm told it's all over. The UAP Disclosure Act has been gutted. No eminent domain, no UAP records review board at Department of Defense has won the battle to gag the public from being informed with the help of key Republicans." So, what do you think? What do you think of that, Jay?
I mean, I think that it's in some ways it's a shame
Yeah,
to um, that there's a lot of potential in the language that was put out. I think that even just the proposed language um, should continuously, even if and when it does not pass, if that's the case, I think that for we should point back to that document because it's right there. And how many times it referred to material, how many times it referred to non-human intelligence, intelligence and things like that.
Mm.
It was all spelled out in the document. I mean, it all but told you that there's a fundamental reality to this. And the
Yeah.
fact that people have spent so much time and energy to try to shut it down is also very indicative. It doesn't take much brain power at all to read that document and realize how much energy was put into shutting it down from the representative from the area of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, by the way,
Mm.
leading the charge. You know, a lot of people thought for years, oh, there's nothing to it. Then why not pass the bill? Why not pass the bill and show people what's there? If there's nothing to it, then just show us what's there. But no, you know, we have to have this blocked. I
Mm.
mean, I think that in many ways, you know, actually shutting the Schumer down after seeing the language that was actually written there, it, in the end, historically, it might actually do more for us than less. Because I've noticed that some critics and skeptics, you know, since the Soul Foundation symposium, since there was risk of Schumer getting shut down, that have gotten a lot more quiet recently. And I think that's because, you know, again, it doesn't take much brain power to realize that what was written in that language and the effort that was put into shutting it down. Now, along those lines, though, I don't think no one piece of legislation is going to fix everything. And I think that it's important to recognize that along the lines of what I was saying earlier, like reclaiming our agency and like doing things ourselves is as important, if not much more important than crossing our fingers and hoping that politicians in Washington, D.C. do the right thing, because they have a historical, you know, track record of not necessarily doing the right thing or not necessarily doing it in a decent time span. You know what I mean? We're, you know, without getting into partisanship and things like that, you know, coming from your perspective, looking at the United States, it's easy to recognize that we have a system that lacks fundamental healthcare you know, a system. We don't have a good healthcare system. We don't have, you know, a nationalized system for education that can really benefit people. You know, you go to college and you have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. Our minimum wage is the same that it's been in over a dozen years. There's a lot of situations that you could point to in our country where we're falling behind, and we're falling behind a lot of other countries in the world, I think. And I don't think that's a controversial position at all. And that, you know, all you have to do is look around. For Americans, all you have to do is look around at what opportunities you've lost and what's happened in the world, and how jaded are you about politics and the military in general. um, and I think that it's unfortunate in some ways that ufology has been basically trained over 70 or 80 years to just root for whatever is happening in Washington, D.C. I think that's stupid. I don't think that that's a good way to go. First of all, it's not representative of world governments. It's not representative of anything but one particular aspect of Western culture, that doesn't even take necessarily like the Five Eyes into consideration, or the other English speaking governments, right? And then there's everybody else in the world. But then there's all the other perspectives. You know, there's all the other perspectives. And if all you're doing is looking at things from a military perspective, you're essentially like a hammer that is only going to see nails. So you're only going to see the parts of the phenomenon, the parts of the issue that are relevant to what you're doing. And so even if we get those truths, they're going to be partial truths. They're going to be just an obscured or oblique representation of what's happening, because they're only taking, you know, national security considerations, advanced technology, and other things into account, and maybe not necessarily looking at things from a more cultural, anthropological, philosophical, humane perspective in terms of like interaction and psychology, personal psychology, other aspects like that, you know. Because at the end of the day, so much of this legislation and so much of what comes out is based around the craft. It's based around craft. It's based around retrievals and things like that. And it's fascinating. It's you know, it's amazing to know that there's a fundamental reality to that. And at the same time, that's just the cars that some of these things drive. That's it.
Mm, mm.
And imagine if something came to our planet and all they cared about was our Toyotas. They didn't even look at us. They didn't even follow us around. All they did is like grab our Toyotas and leave. That would be ridiculous. Why would they do that? That would be such a simple, reductive thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, in many ways, I'm not glad that, it's a sad day for transparency issues. But at the
Yeah,
same time, I think that many, many avenues need to happen from many perspectives and many backgrounds.
yeah.
Many specialties need to be funded and need to move forward in their own ways. Because again, with the hammer and nails comparison, we're seeing situations where if we're throwing all of our eggs or many of our eggs into one or two baskets, they can still, hammer those nails, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Jay. I totally agree with you. However, the idea that so Danny Sheehan was talking to James at Iron Dolly the other day. This absolutely extraordinary interview that he gave to James, and he it was packed full of amazing stuff. But one of the things he was talking about was about him and his, I forgot what they're called, but his foundation.
New Paradigm Institute, I
That's right.
believe,
Yeah,
is the new.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Being one of the bodies that are looking at people for this kind of board of 9 people, yeah. And so that
Hmm.
he said there would be a kind of military, kind of person on that board. He's quite happy for that. But
Hmm.
that's one of, there's another 8 seats, so then you bring in
Hmm.
the other people, the anthropologists and whoever else, and
Hmm.
the idea, I mean, I suppose, you know, it comes down to uh, like who is it? And in fact, Grusch himself has said this. It's not. He says things like, "It's not for me to say this. It's for the president to say this." I'm happy to give kind of general, and I've been, kind of mandated or whatever, kind of given permission to say general things. But in terms of the specifics, that's not my role. Yeah, it's for the president to do this. And I suppose that there's a kind of like a general sense that you want something to kind of feed into a hierarchy that may well be distrusted by many people. I mean, I live in the UK, yeah, so we don't need to
Hmm.
talk about how unpopular Rishi Sunak is. So do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
compared to, I know Biden's sinking, but Sunak is got nothing on Sunak. Um, but the idea that there must be some kind of hierarchy where, or some kind of, spokesperson that most people, again, even if it's just the media, and half of the people think, oh well, this is all load of old nonsense, I didn't vote for him in the first place. But some person is going to stand up there and at some point say, this is what we have. So I suppose if you kind of go along with the structure and the kind of timeline of the Schumer amendment, you were going to get to 2030. You're going to get to this point where the 7 years has passed and whatever else, and you've got this stage where, with eminent domain, with all of the other things in place, um, you've got quite a bit of uh, stuff cleared to be, like, documents and evidence cleared to be made public, and then it opens
Hmm.
up this space for somebody to do that, for a president in the future to to
Hmm.
to do that, with the hope, I imagine, that some people are going to pay attention to that. You know what I mean? And of course, I
Yeah.
totally get where you're. I mean, this whole conversation is a celebration of what you are doing. You're not saying, I'm going to wait for the government to do it. You're getting on with it yourself. And yet at the same time, I suppose that there is a kind of argument there about, you know, how do you, I mean, I suppose it's to do with, because I've said all along, like, it's not to do with convincing me. It's obviously not to do with convincing you. So what is the
Hmm.
purpose, I suppose, of the Schumer Amendment? And what is the purpose of this kind of Council of Nine, or whatever you want to call it? What's
It's a
the,
great. It's a.
you know what I
It's a
mean?
great question. It's a
Like, who are
great
they,
question.
who is trying to be convinced, if you like?
I
Or not
mean,
even
I think that
convinced, but what's the kind of, yeah, like I say, what's the purpose?
Well, it's kind of, it's hard to say what the purpose is really in some ways, because it partially comes down to, you know, that particular piece of legislation, it it held a lot of potential. It holds a lot of potential, but it also holds a lot of potential for things to be thwarted, like a lot of situations do. Like Arrow looked like it had a lot of potential as well,
Yeah.
but depending on who's actually overseeing it and who's actually running the show, it just potentially turns into a misinformation campaign.
Hmm. Hmm.
And similarly, when people kind of brought up the Schumer and they say, "Oh, it'll be like the JFK situation," it's like that was a really weird reference point, considering we still don't exactly know who else was involved in that murder.
Of course, yeah.
Um, and that they're still hiding documents from over 50 years, well over 50 years ago. Um, and so I did see that there were some aspects of the amendment that were not necessarily the greatest.
Yeah.
First of all, I mean, like one thing that Danny Sheehan was kind of pointing towards that I think is important for people to recognize. And like, generally speaking, like, now that it's kind of like, it looks like it's not going so well, in part, it depends on who those 9 people are to a
Of
huge
course,
degree.
yeah.
Like, who are these civil, who are these civilians? And are they really civilians?
Hmm.
Okay, like along those lines, Danny Sheehan was talking about certain people, and I don't want to like get into exactly who those people were or where they work or things like that. But there are people that are essentially civilians that are also consultants for defense contractors,
Hmm.
right? And so what if those 9 civilians all worked for 3 different defense contractors? How much truth would you really get out of a situation like that? How much would you expect? How much would it'd be reasonable for you to expect? And then, it would remain to be seen whether you should be disappointed or elated at what would actually come from a situation like that. None of these situations are going to be a clean shot, a clean half court, all net, no backboard basketball shot, um, for like capital D disclosure. I think that even if the president of the United States, goes up and talks, whether it's a Republican or whether it's a Democrat, typically, we're so close to 50-50 politically within our country. And, whoever it is typically slightly unpopular, even within their own party. And so depending on the day that Biden or a Trump or somebody like that goes up on stage, at best, they might be like believed and listened to and approved of by maybe 45% of our population, much less the rest of the world, right? So how, I'm sure that would move the needle for some certain people for sure. Absolutely. Of course it would. But I mean, even that kind of hoop that people have been like waiting, crossing their fingers for people to get through, of course, by nature, it's going to be a politicized situation. It's going to be an over politicized situation, and people are going to use it to their advantage, whether they're one side or another side. And so it's going to get spun, like everything in DC gets spun. And so I'm not waiting for Biden to tell me anything. You know what I mean? Like I'm not waiting for a Trump to tell me anything either. I don't think that that's a healthy way to approach life. I don't think that it's an accurate way to approach existence. And I think that it's deeply weird and kind of troubling that, the maverick thinkers, almost everybody that's involved in ufology and anomalous studies, they think of themselves as independent thinkers. They think of themselves as mavericks. They think of themselves as people that think outside the box. But then we've been trained over years to just be waiting for the president to say something. It's ridiculous. It's
Hmm.
silly. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't mean any offense, but like, I just think that like, that fundamentally we're being kind of defanged as thinkers,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, in general, and we need to, and like part of that is just to remember that like, we don't necessarily have to depend on authority to get this done, to depend on our government to get these done, because depending on what town you live in our country, maybe you can't even get the potholes on the road fixed. much less, hear something about this, right? So I hope that that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It definitely makes a lot of sense. I mean, especially in the context of, politics has failed. This is an
Yeah,
example of politics failing, essentially, isn't it?
totally.
So,
100%.
yeah, absolutely. Um, Now, I mean, of course, we have to. I don't think we have spoken. Well, we haven't spoken since April, so lots has happened since April, including Grusch, of course, and the testimony that he gave in, when was that, July?
Hmm.
And in the lead up to
It
that,
was.
there was lots
Hmm.
and lots of lead up to the, interview he gave with Leslie, and then the interview he gave with Ross.
Hmm.
Um, lots and lots of rumor about somebody like Grush coming out, and then he did come out, and then they set up that hearing, um, and it made waves. It made news around the world, and of course, just what was it? 2 weeks ago, he spoke to Joe Rogan. He's done
Hmm.
some long form interviews. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating guy, like really interesting guy, and of course the information is absolutely extraordinary. Um, what's your kind of take? I mean, just as you're here,
Hmm.
it would be odd if I didn't ask you. What's your
Sure.
like? How do you think things have changed, and like since we spoke last in April, in relation to Grush and the kind of yeah? How do you see that?
Well, I think the landscape's changed a bit. I mean, I a good bit.
Mm,
And I think it's still important to recognize like how important people like Dave Grush and people like Leslie and Ralph and Ross too. But Leslie and Ralph broke that story. I remember since you used the framing of the April conference, I knew that Leslie was working on a big story at that point.
mm-hmm,
And we were working in close proximity at the time, like literally at the venue and things like this. And she was taking phone calls about the situation. And of course, I can talk a little bit about that now, but of course I couldn't then. And I would never, I enjoy being able to talk with her more openly about things. But even in a situation like that, she has to be incredibly careful about those kinds of
of
stories
course,
for good reason.
of
For
course.
good reason. And there are a lot of people and a lot of people that work at, major companies and maybe people that are involved in certain work that wouldn't want to see a situation like that happen. And of course, since Grush came out, he's talked about retribution and threats, and other people have as well. And I think that that's very real.
Mm,
Just as the crash retrieval programs are very real, in my view. And I think that that's going to be seen as being an objectively true situation. I don't think anybody that was in that room at the Soul Foundation, even though we can't speak directly necessarily about some of the things that happened there, nobody left that. I don't think anybody left that situation thinking that there wasn't a fundamental reality to the crash retrieval program and even the recovery of bodies.
mm,
I think that pretty much yeah, I saw some very sober reflections from people in that room that publicly anyway act as if they need to be skeptical of that situation.
mm.
I saw a lot of kind of people turning pale over the course of those 2 days at certain points, given some fundamental realities that people were talking about. So along those lines, I think Dave Grush spoke by Zoom at the Soul Foundation conference, and it was great to see him. It was great to see him. I went down for the House hearing
Yeah,
this
yeah.
summer. I showed up early, and again, that's another situation. We started the podcast, and we're close to ending the podcast with the same situation where it's like some people I saw online were like, "How did he get in?" And it was tenacity. I showed up at 3 in the morning the night before, and I waited to get into that room.
Fantastic.
It's not because I had some like golden ticket Willy
Yeah.
Wonka style or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
It's because I was literally sitting out there with people like Randy Nickerson who was napping
Yeah. Yeah.
through the night to be able to get into the room. That's how we got into
Yeah.
the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was nothing special about that. Again, like this is one of these things where it's like people get mad from not even trying to put in any effort, and they need to recognize that if they want to make a difference, if they want to be heard, if they want to do something, it's incredibly important to put in the effort. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's as simple as putting in the effort. And as many
Yeah.
people have said in
Absolutely.
the past, how more than half of life is showing up. You have to
Mm.
show up. And that's not meant in a bad way. It's meant to be an empowering way. Anybody
John Lennon
could be
line, yeah.
doing what these things. Yeah, anybody can be anybody, can be making a difference in this situation. It's a matter of like figuring out how to deal with your time and being methodical about things
Yeah.
and to really make a difference, no matter how and that's true of anything. It's not just true for this field, of course.
Yeah.
So anyway, like
Absolutely.
the House UAP hearing was incredible to see, and
Yeah.
I think it was amazing. And there are times where I looked down and I felt like, I had goosebumps because of like the things that Dave was saying in front of all of these politicians and in that room with all these cameras around. And it was amazing just to recognize that. And later that day, I was hanging out with Randy Nickerson again and Jordan, my friend who I'm working on the show with, and some other folks, and we were hanging out in this hotel lounge, and we look. There had been this soccer match, this football match happening on screen on a TV over here, and then it switched over to the nightly news. And this was like a Spanish language broadcast. It was Univision, the Spanish language
Yeah.
cable channel over here, and it flipped over to the news. And immediately there's this wide shot of the room, and we look over and we're like, "Hey, it's us! Look!" You could see all of us in the kind of the background of the shot for the most part, and it was like, what a trippy world it is,
Yeah.
that it's like 11 o'clock
Absolutely.
that night, and and at least for that moment on that particular channel, they were leading the news with it. And so,
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people in this community, they don't necessarily. There are people that do. There are people that definitely recognize that movement is happening,
Yeah.
and it's just that like we have to push so hard to
Yeah.
get, we have to push like 5 times as hard to get like one unit, further downfield, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so people get frustrated, but at the same time, if you look at this year, if you look at
Yeah.
2023,
Absolutely.
I think arguably, to me anyway, it's the furthest we've come since 2017, certainly in terms of having an eventful
Yeah.
year
Yeah.
and pushing the ball forward in this field.
Yeah. No doubt about it. Yeah. No doubt about it at all. I totally agree, Jay. Well,
Okay.
listen, good Jay. I can't thank you enough for spending some time with me this evening. And I've very much enjoyed seeing darkness fall over New York outside your window.
Oh,
And also
and it
I
got
have
dark
my
over there
own
too.
exactly.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, it's the
Oh,
winter
Pete.
edition, So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you
Well,
so
Pete,
much, Jay.
absolutely. Always a huge pleasure to talk with you. I love speaking with you. It's always a pleasure to be on your show. You do great work. It's great to see you doing a podcast again. I hope to see episode 70 and 71
Yeah,
in the near future.
absolutely.
And I hope you and everybody that's listening today and in the future, in the near future, that you have happy holidays and that you enjoy this wonderful season that we have in front of us.
Happy holidays, everyone. Go online. See you on Saturday online again in the live stream. Take care.